Let's see if we can make something happen when the form is submitted. We want to do this thing, right? We want to tell the page that when something happens, do another thing. When what happens? When the form is submitted. Do, well, we don't know what yet, but we want to do something. So in our JavaScript, we don't need console log yay. This time, right from the beginning, we're going to put everything inside an object. Easier to do from scratch than it is to add it after the fact. This time I'm just going to call it, Dinoplasty is a little long, I'm just going to call it app. And since there's some stuff that needs to happen right at the very beginning, I'm again going to put a function called init. And this would be a method because it's an object property. Don't forget your comma. And before I forget, I'm going to go ahead and at the very bottom call app_init, so that if I have a problem, it's not going to be because of that. Now here's a little shorthand courtesy of ES6. When an object property is a method, instead of saying instead of saying name of method :function, you can just do this, get rid of the colon, get rid of the keyword function, like that. It just looks a little nicer. But remember, that's the same thing. I would still get to this by saying app.init. Still a method, just a slightly cleaner syntax. So this time around, we're going to use that shorter syntax. We're embracing the future. So we want to add an event listener, right? We want to add it to something, the form, right? We're going to do what we did last time and try to make this flexible right from the get-go. So instead of hard-coding the selector inside our object, we're going to pass the selector inside this init function. So we gave it an ID of dino form, or dino-form, right? So init needs to accept an argument. We'll call that form selector. So now we could actually grab that element from the DOM with document.querySelector form selector. Then we need to add an event listener to it, right? We could save the form to a variable and then call that variable .addEventListener, or we could just chain it on the end here. If we chain it on the end here, this line's going to get really long and hard to read. So here's another little trick. If we put a line break right before the dot, JavaScript can handle that. It'll figure out what's going on. So when you're chaining things like this, calling another method on the return value of a previous method, you can do this to make it a little more readable. Put line breaks before the dots and indent them. Also pretty handy when you're doing it on a screen that isn't all that wide. So now we're calling query selector on whatever form selector was passed in, and we're calling addEventListener on that. addEventListener needs to know two things: what it's listening for and what to do when that thing happens. That image, by the way, comes from this blog post that is linked from the website. It's on day 1. So if events are either blowing your mind or you're just curious and want to learn more excruciating detail about how they work, I think this is a really good explanation. It has about an 11-minute video, as well as a lot of text and pretty pictures. And a list of some common events. Not nearly all of them. There are a whole lot of built-in events. You can look them up on MDN if you really want to. Things like click, mouse move, mouse over, double click, DOM content loaded, key down, key up, scroll, stuff like that. All right, so we're listening for what event? Submit. If we did click on the button, it wouldn't catch hitting enter inside the field. So that's the first part, what event we're listening for. Now we need a handler. We need a function. And we haven't written it yet. We could put an anonymous function right there. In fact, we could make it an arrow function. We're not going to, but we could. It just needs a function object. Instead, we're going to make another method. What should we call it? Instead of handle submit this time, let's actually describe what we're doing. How about addDino or addDinosaur? Seems legit. Let's make another method down here. addDino, comma. So what do I put here inside the parentheses? This dot addDino. Let's just throw a console log in here just to make sure that it really gets called at the appropriate time. Console log. Submitted. And we are running a init down here, so this should run. So the instructions we've given to the page, nothing's going to happen right off the bat, except it's going to start listening, right? We have told it. When submit happens, do something. Add a dinosaur. Refresh the page. Let's try it. Allosaurus. What gives? What happened? What's that, Andrew? We forgot to prevent default, right? I'm sure glad I didn't write like 50 lines of JavaScript code in here, run it, and then think, I don't even get an error message. What's wrong? It must be something in one of these 50 lines just because of that stupid thing. So, test early and often. Make sure the small stuff's working before you go writing a bunch more. So we know that addDino, because it's an event handler, is going to be passed in an event object. We're not calling this function, JavaScript is, and it's always going to pass in that argument. And we can call prevent default on that to stop it from actually submitting the form. And then, yeah, I still want my console log in here. T-Rex. Let's make sure we're even on our console. There we go. Submitted. Yay, we hooked up an event listener. Let's not worry about adding stuff to the DOM just yet. Let's just see if we can at least get what we typed in there out and console log that instead of the word submitted. How would I get that? How do I get what I typed in there? You all did the homework. I know you know. David, did you have an answer? Yeah. But you were moving your lips. I thought you were trying to answer. So to get what we typed in there, we need to get that input. And to get that input, we need to get to the form. So inside the event handler, how do we get to the form? So the form is the thing that we called addEventListener on in the first place, right? Which makes it the what of the event. Go ahead, Jaden. It's the target. So from this event object, we can say event.target, and that gives us the form. So to get that text box, we can then use the name that we gave it. We said name dyno name. So we can say event.target.dyno name. And that gives us the actual text box, right? The actual input. To get what we typed in there, however, there's one more thing we have to do. Tom? Dot value. That's what we typed. So let's say const dyno name equals event target dyno name dot value. And then let's console log dyno name instead of submitted. So we've at least got something dynamic going on. Refresh the page, type T-Rex. Yay! It worked. Doesn't do much, but setting up an event handler, we've written 15 lines of JavaScript. I'm going to go ahead and commit that. Yeah, in just 1 second. Go ahead and commit this. Set up, submit handler for dyno form.